Hi, everyone. I'm Gary Berman, the host of the Cyber Hero Adventure Show. Thanks so much for who you are and what you do and why you do it. Our mission is to shine the light on the unsung cyber heroes who toil in anonymity to keep us safe at work and home, at school. And today we have an extraordinarily interesting discussion that we're going to be going into regarding some breaking news, which we'll stand by and hear from an amazing subject matter expert, Bill Holstein. Hey, Bill, how you doing?
Hi. Thumbs up. Let's go.
Yeah, welcome to the show. Do you like that cool introduction?
I do. Very slick.
Well, the whole idea is to distill complicated technology and other information into something that, all of us can kind of get our heads around a little bit.
I believe in that. That's my mission too. I'm part of your mission.
Yay. As well as 23,000 others on LinkedIn. Most people don't know about our audience, but we have some of the most important people in the world in cybersecurity who have the same mission. And, one of the interesting things that I've learned as a former victim turned advocate in cybersecurity is that criminals are horizontally oriented. They share information freely. But, the white hats are vertically structured, and because of all types of reasons, they have a little bit more difficulty sharing information, like laws or intellectual property or money and stuff. So,
and the distinction between the public and private sector, that's a big thing in the United States. But other countries, primarily China, do not observe such niceties.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I want to really begin by, thanking you for being the sponsor of today's episode. Bill, we're going to talk about your, quite extraordinary book here, Grand Strategy. And to me, I read the subtext, countering China, taming technology, and restoring the media. That sounds like a lot for a 30-minute show.
It's a mouthful for sure.
Yeah, so I think today, if it's okay with you, we'll focus really primarily on breaking news, which is that we see here. Chinese nationals working with the Ministry of State Security are charged with global computer intrusion, campaign targeted intellectual property, and confidential business information. That was just announced yesterday at the White House. So let's kind of jump in on that to help our audience understand a little bit about what the announcement was all about yesterday.
Well, there are several interesting things about this. This pattern has been developing in earnest since the 2014, 2015 timeframe, when the Chinese stole the thumbprints, fingerprints, and identifications for more than 20 million federal employees from the Office of Personnel Management, then the Equifax attack, then the Marriott attack, and massive other attacks, the AP-10 attack on our cloud computing system, which was revealed in December of 2018. So this has been escalating, and it's now reached the point where we can say that the government now is stating categorically that it is the Chinese government, the Ministry of State Security, their equivalent of the CIA and NSA, that is coordinating these activities. We've seen what we call the APT groups, the Advanced Persistent Threat Groups. And so we haven't really understood the nature of their relationship with the central government. But now the US government is saying clearly these are arms of the Chinese state security ministry. And so that's one thing that's important, is that we're now linking it directly to the government. Another thing that's important is that all of NATO came along for the ride. These are important incremental steps. The big hurdle we haven't gotten over yet is recognizing that naming and shaming the faces, putting their faces on wanted posters, most wanted posters, isn't going to end this activity. As long as the Chinese can do this virtually for free and get access to all of our technological secrets, and as well as engage in encouraging ransomware attacks, there's no reason for them to stop. We have to figure out a way to get it to stop this. And it starts here in our country and how we manage our IT systems and our communication systems, which were created and with the assumption that it was a benign world. It was a fair world. People would engage on the basis of our rules. So we've built these great IT systems, cloud computing systems, and fundamentally they're defenseless against a determined state adversary. So that's where I'd like to we have some very distinguished people watching and listening today, and I'd like to hear some of their thoughts about how do we proceed? How do we stop this pattern of interpenetration of our systems?
Well, that's a great segue to introduce a friend of the show, Scott Schober. Hey, Scott, how you doing?
Hey, how you doing there, Gary? Good to see you. Nice to see you there, Bill. Congratulations on the book.
Yeah, and if you just stop and think about it for a minute, just to unpack what Bill just said, there's so many elements to it. There's so many complexities to it. And one of the things that you're particularly good at, Scott, in my body of experience, is helping people understand specific kinds of steps that we can consider taking. Because from everything I've listened and learned about, you really cannot win by playing defense alone. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that surmises it pretty good. And that's part of the challenge. I think in this particular case, as we see all these things unraveling in the headlines there, the White House is really blaming China, and specifically they're targeting the devastating Microsoft attack that happened some time ago or earlier, a couple months ago. And China is really pointing the fingers right back. And that's the part that's part of the challenge. Both sides are doing this. Unfortunately, we don't see really any evidence or proof from China, at least I haven't to date, that's pointing that the U.S. has actually done anything from a cybersecurity perspective attacking China. However, the converse is true. They've tracked down several things and have proven and repeatedly asked China to stop these things. Now, again, I guess to clarify, and it's not the Chinese government that's actually orchestrating these attacks. What it is it's these Chinese orchestrated criminal gangs, in a sense, these cyber criminals for hire. That's who's actually doing it. Just like in Russia, the same type of parallel things happening. The problem is the Chinese government's kind of just doing this, turning their head. They're not stopping them. And they have the power to stop them or slow them down or discipline them. It's hard to do it from here, from the United States or any other country. So the government has to take an active role to really prosecute and stop these repeated attacks, I think, against not just the U.S., but even other countries.
They don't have any real incentive to stop these attacks. These attacks are part and parcel of Xi Jinping's strategy to weaken the Western alliance, to purloin our technology and develop it more rapidly in China. This does fit within the Chinese state strategy, the Communist Party-led strategy. And in this particular case, Scott, the United States government did say that the Ministry of State Security was directly involved in supporting these groups. So they've drawn a tighter link between the APT groups and the Chinese government. And so I think we can say that the Chinese government is authorizing, allowing, and benefiting from these, if it isn't specifically ordering the attacks. But the reason the Chinese are not getting caught as much as the Russians are is that they have the unique requirement that if you are going to do business in China, and most major American companies are, you have to turn over all of your access to your system, to your IT system. And if you're going to make a router or make any kind of computer gear in China that uses encryption code, then you have to share that with the Chinese government as well. So, as I've written recently, that the Chinese have the ability to get into these corporate systems and hide within them for years at a time without being detected, because they have fooled our intrusion detection systems by obtaining legitimate user IDs and passwords. They're deeply embedded in our systems, and we can't see them. So that's the advantage that the Chinese have over the Russians.
Yeah.
And excuse me, Scott, one second. Bill, how when I started reading your book, your origin story is quite extraordinary. Can you just share with our audience a little bit of the backstory of how you got to this moment, and when you lived in Asia, and how did you end up spending your career in this topic?
Well, I was transferred out at age 27 to Hong Kong and covered for UPI, United Press International, and was on the ground when China first started their modernization efforts. And I was there to see could they turn the corner from socialist class struggle into modernization, and I was able to see it happening in southern China, and later became Beijing bureau chief for UPI. So I since then, for the last 40 years, I've followed the China story, been back and forth dozens of times, but also started covering technology in 1996 when I moved to U.S. News and World Report. Covering technology, covering the early stages of the internet. None of us knew whether retail, e-tail commerce was going to work because no one would want to enter their credit cards information on these silly little things called computers. I followed the Microsoft trial. We interviewed Joel Klein in Washington about that. So when you combine the China chops with the technology chops, I straddled these different camps. You have many people who are experts on Chinese foreign policy or Chinese Communist Party development, but those kinds of experts tend to be very different than the people who understand the technology. You have people who understand routers and gigabits and all that. They don't know anything about Chinese thinking, Chinese strategy, Chinese ideology. So I've combined these two universes of knowledge into hopefully a highly readable and accessible book.
Indeed. And Scott, forgive me, you were going to say?
No problem. I just wanted to add, because I really appreciate the insight that Bill shared there. And I was thinking on top of it, thinking about China, how they're very strategic in this. And I think one little nuance that seems to me to stand out a little bit more pronounced than perhaps previous hacks, looking at this one from a future standpoint, is where it's heading is now they're really focusing on criminal contracts, hackers for hire in a sense, and it's kind of like it's state sponsored the way it appears. Where in the past it was a lot more separated there, and in this case that you could see clearer ties for financial gain, and usually there's a separation of that. Now you look at it, now it's a lot more alarming because now it's starting to affect people's pocketbooks, and that's when you say, whoa, wait a second here. And I think that's where US is saying enough is enough. We're not going to take any more of this, and they got to take it to the next level and not just talk about, hey, we're going to implement sanctions or we're going to do this or that. It seems like they're going to take this to the next level as this investigation is getting closer and closer to fruition.
Well, one of the real problems, and I appreciate in all other perspectives on this, one of the real challenges is that our companies, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, and others, are deeply ensconced in the fabric of the Chinese technology sector, and in some senses are being used, I think, as avenues of influence or penetration or in fact, outright control. Yeah. So this is one of the hardest things for us as Americans to contemplate is our government needs to have a conversation with the private sector about how do we control and mitigate the risks that your systems have been penetrated, that your technology is being purloined.
Well, Bill, forgive the interruption. Look at what Curry just wrote on here. It's exactly what you just said about 5G infrastructure. Thanks for sending this in. By the way, we're open for comments now. I usually wait till a little bit longer, but thank you for doing that. So what do you think about what you're reading on the bottom there?
Well, this is part of the Chinese information warfare to build Huawei into the world's telecommunication systems, because the Chinese have reached the point of sophistication. I mean, this is we're seeing stunning examples of Chinese technological breakthroughs in space, for example, just unbelievable that they are on par with us and landing on Mars. But coming back to Huawei, the Chinese have discovered that if you can get access to the flow of data through the telecommunications systems, you can sniff it. You can sniff at the packets for keywords and key concepts, and so you can control the discourse of a nation by building its telecommunications system, and then building smart cities. Another buzzword: smart cities, where you can observe your opponents using facial recognition cameras, and you can observe traffic movements, and you can track people. You can diffuse your political opposition. So the Huawei is a thin edge of the wedge to build their digital road, the digital Silk Road strategy that they've enunciated. So yeah, Huawei is at that absolute center of the Chinese effort to build the global dominant position in technology.
I happened to be at a conference about 2 years ago or so, and Katie Aronson from the CMMC, which is the Department of Defense initiative to certify people's levels of cybersecurity maturity in the supply chain, 350,000 or so, companies that do business with the government. And she was actually sitting next to the USA president for Huawei and had this debate kind of live, which was quite extraordinary. And I was incredibly impressed with her because she stuck to her guns and said out loud, we have serious questions about the technology and the system and your intention to use it, and we're not going to do it. What do you think we can do with the rest of the world, because they sell this equipment so inexpensively, and how do we stop that?
Well, increasingly, there are signs that the two technology spheres are going to have to redefine their boundaries. The Chinese are building their own information sphere, which they control, and we need to be able to make sure that our allies and like-minded nations understand the nature of this game, and that if you buy Huawei in a smart city, that you in effect are becoming part of a Chinese digital empire. They will own you. They will own you. And so if you want to maintain independence from that, then, a Western-based system would be presumably not as intrusive, not as controlling. But we need to make the case. There are a lot of people in the world who are they just don't understand the nature of the Chinese digital strategy in the world and don't believe what we American technology hawks, I like that phrase, the technology hawks are saying. So we have a lot of convincing to do. I think we've made progress in Europe in particular in persuading them not to embrace Huawei systems. But the Chinese are coming at the issue of global domination from so many different vectors. The One Road and One Bridge initiative, One Belt and One Road initiative, BRI.
It's unbelievable to me what you're just saying, but I know it's true. They actually say these things in public, what their intentions are, and they have names for it. These are overt strategies. Scott, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's also looking at the bigger picture, what this has done to the 5G race, because this is really for global dominance from wireless and internet and communication perspective, but also from a national security perspective. Look at just the decision that UK has made, the United Kingdom has made following the United States push to ban Huawei stuff. That's going to take 7 years to remove all the 5G infrastructure at a cost of about $700 million.
Wow.
That's staggering. So what does that mean? They have to remove it all and at the same time replace it. They're going to be putting in mostly Nokia, a 5G infrastructure, and a few other companies. You can see why China is so upset. That is a tremendous amount of business. They represent about 65%, Huawei in particular, of the 5G infrastructure globally. As country, one by one, you have the US, United Kingdom, Australia, Brazil, many other countries now starting to say, we're thinking of banning, or we are banning Huawei equipment entirely. That can have a devastating effect to China. You're talking billions upon billions of dollars just in infrastructure equipment. And the underlying, even though they say it's not true that they don't spy with that equipment, we know that it has the ability to spy and eavesdrop, and the government can reach in there and grab and have access to that pipe if they require it. So I think we're looking at something much, much larger here, and it may affect things going forward to a greater extent in world domination, at least from the standpoint of cybersecurity and wireless connectivity.
And for our audience who may not be familiar with Scott, his superhero name is the Wireless Warrior, and he's CEO of Berkeley Veritronics, which is a company that his family has had for around 40 years or so, and he's really one of the leading global experts on the stuff we're talking about. So going back to the book, Bill, let me just understand something a little bit further. So referring again to the subtext of the book, countering China, taming technology, and restoring the media. Help our audience understand how those three things are linked.
Well, I argue that we have to tame big technology. The big technology companies right now do not believe that they are on our side as we confront an increasingly aggressive and powerful China. They are trying to play both sides. This is a sub-theme of the globalization theory, which I espoused for many years. It made perfect sense to me for many years that we could have a flow of people, money, technology, goods across national boundaries, and that we would all win because we all were going to be playing by roughly the same rules. Well, now we're discovering that the second largest economy in the world is not playing by those rules. And the corollary is that if I'm CEO of an American corporation, my job is to make as much money as I can for shareholders and let the government worry about national security. It's not my problem. But in fact, we're discovering that national security, we cannot maintain American national security without our big tech companies coming along for the ride and supporting our efforts to develop new technologies while mitigating or easing the flow and the development of brand new technologies for China, for the Chinese military, for crying out loud. So that is how the technology piece is related to the China piece. The media piece is I'll just throw this out quickly, is that the American media has been degraded through economic pressures, but also the rise of the social media giants. The tech giants have eroded our ability to have truly meaningful democratic discussions of the big issues. And that for us to find our way out of this hole, we need intellectual leadership of the media, a revitalized media. So that's how they're all three related.
That brings up a future show. We have about 12 shows in development right now, and one of them is exactly that, the nexus of media and technology. So love to have you back to discuss more in depth that aspect of what you've written about. Would you like to do that as I put you on the spot?
Be lovely.
Okay.
I'm part of the cyber heroes community, I think.
Yay!
Do I have time for one last example?
No. Yeah, we have a lot more time. Let me just run something by you here real quickly. So you had asked me when you sent me the book to refer to chapter 14 anyways as one of the seminal pieces. And I have the book right here, and I noted you refer to it as How America's China Dream Turned Sour. Maybe you can amplify that for our audience.
Well, when we first started this 40 years ago, we believed that the Chinese, as they got wealthier, that they would want the things that we demand in the West. We thought that they would want greater pluralism, greater diversity of their institutional makeup, and that over time, the Communist Party would never really leave, but would allow for the emergence of other centers of power, excuse me. So when we saw it, that vision held true for decades. We saw lawyers being able to go into China and work with dissidents. We saw NGOs being able to go in and work for women's issues or minority issues. We saw a bubbling up of demonstrations against seizure of land by corrupt bureaucrats. We saw under the Hu Jintao and Dao Zemin, we saw for the 20 years of their rule, we saw the Communist Party allowing the emergence of a private sector, Alibaba, Tencent, all those guys. And so we had ourselves convinced that our vision of a peaceful evolution of Chinese society would happen, that they would become responsible members of the global order that we had created after World War II. It's only been since Xi Jinping has been able to consolidate power circa 2014, I would say, is when he really became into his own after his anti-corruption campaign. We now see that he's a fundamentally different kind of communist leader who has reinserted the Communist Party into everything. This is the backdrop for the crackdown on Jack Ma, the crackdown on DD, which had the audacity to list on the New York Stock Exchange without Communist Party's permission. So he is imposing an absolute authoritarian ideology, a variation of communism that we haven't seen, not even with Mao Zedong. Mao was not really a ruler, an authoritarian ruler in this sense. In fact, Xi Jinping's heroes are Lenin and Stalin, not Mao Zedong. So he's creating a digital authoritarian empire. There's no other way to put it. We just have never seen the likes of this before. This is far more complex challenge than the Soviet Union was, because we're so much more deeply interpenetrated economically with China. We've merged our economies. They have 1.4 billion people compared. The Soviet Union had roughly 280 or 300 million people at the time of the great competition. So we are intertwined in a way that we weren't with the Soviets. So this is again a global battle. It's based a great deal on technology, but it's a global battle for whose values and whose interests are going to prevail. And so if we retreat into our ostrich hole in the sand, China will, in effect, establish large measures of control, not just technologically, but economically as well. And so we will wake up and find ourselves that we're isolated in the world. So this is what's at stake here, and technology, though, is one of the biggest pieces of it.
And so Scott, just to build on that point, I saw you nodding in agreement, to what Bill is saying. Let's focus now for the announcement that, was made yesterday from the White House, and, help us unpack the implications of naming and shaming and other things that were brought forth yesterday.
I think, at least from the perspective of the U.S., it's good to see that they're calling out the Chinese government on some of this stuff. Too many times it appears that administration waits too long, doesn't act enough, and I think people get sick of reading the headlines and saying, enough is enough. They're either hacking or they're not hacking. If they are, you got to do something about it. I think the next step is doing something maybe a little bit more drastic. And when I say drastic, I don't mean military action or anything of that sort, but maybe it's specific sanctions. Is what Bill was saying. The countries, it's a very strange time, because you've got the U.S. and China, two superpowers in a sense, that are partnering, but they're really not partners. There's that disconnect there that makes it hard. I know as a business owner, we're very dependent upon China and surrounding countries, really all of Asia, just for components, especially toward radio frequency things. And if we as a small company are so dependent upon Asia to manufacture these niche parts, guess what? Globally, for telecommunications, we are all dependent upon that. So therefore, to me, to have success globally, there has to be a partnership there. But there has to also be truth and understanding and balance in that, some give and take. And it seems like it's a little too much give and not enough take. So at least I'm glad to see. And again, I try to remain neutral in this from a political standpoint, but it's good to see that it seems like they're actually taking some action and saying enough is enough from the perspective of the Biden administration. So I think that's positive news. Where this leads to, that I don't know. Probably Bill could weigh in on that more, because it's really looking at the history of how China responds to these things and understanding deeper their strategy that I don't think the average person in the U.S. really fully appreciates or gets. I'm just learning about it, but I'd love to hear what Bill's thoughts are on that.
Well, the Chinese understand what technological dominance means. Mm-hmm. You remember the Silk Road? All the Europeans had to go on the Silk Road, Marco Polo and all those other guys, because the Chinese knew how to make silk, and all the European ladies wanted their silk. And they knew about perfumes and spices and Ming porcelain vases and such. So the reason that they had to make these long treks across the Gobi Desert and other assorted unfriendly places was they needed these things that the Chinese had. So the Chinese have had periods in their history when they were the dominant power on the planet. And that's their vision. That is the Chinese dream. That's what Xi Jinping means when he says, let's reestablish the Chinese dream. That's what's in his head at night. So we are barbarians. I mean, the Chinese, I don't believe, understand the concept of equality. We welcomed them into the World Trading Organization. We welcomed them into the system we created. We thought that they would reciprocate, play by our rules. But I've had recent sessions with Chinese young people, students, who said to me, Bill, why did you think we would fit into the world order you created? It was created to exclude us, wasn't it? So they're having a moment of real muscle flexing to see just how far they can push their technological and economic and cultural ambitions. So it's a fascinating moment. I hope that we can arouse more attention and more understanding. The one story I wanted to tell you, Gary and Scott, this will give you the heebie-jeebies, as we used to say in West Virginia, that the Ministry of State Security is using open source tools created in the United States to troll through American computer systems looking for known vulnerabilities. This is a key concept. Known vulnerabilities are flaws that exist in software programs. There are millions and millions of lines of code in software programs. And so if you're a software developer, you borrow from this library, you borrow from this library, and you put it all together, you write some of your own fresh code. But these packages of millions of lines of code are sold. And so the National Institute for Standards and Technology, part of the Department of Commerce, publishes lists of known vulnerabilities in these software systems. So the Chinese said, oh, that's very interesting. So the Ministry of State Security said, we're going to go trolling through the entire American computer system looking for these known vulnerabilities. And let's just leave a little something behind, a little shell or Trojan horse, so that if we really want to get in there, we can. This was reported last fall by the Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency within the Homeland Security Department, and the FBI was also a part of this, authored this report. Nobody reacted. Nobody said, is this acceptable? Are we going to allow the Ministry of State Security to penetrate our computer systems? Yet we have not done anything about it. Scott, I'd be interested in your feelings about this, but it seems to me we have to harden all our systems. We have to, as a nation, we have to start making more of our own computer gear. We can't be completely dependent on gear made in China. I mean, if all your components or many of your components are being made in Chinese-speaking Asia, you have a built-in vulnerability to your products. So we need to harden our IT infrastructures. We need to, as Gary, as we saw last week in your healthcare show, the healthcare industry, I think that just in one example of what's happening in industry after industry, is that people at the top, CEOs and C-suite, want to continue to make money to satisfy their shareholders and to continue playing the game the way it's been played. But if for companies to really become more resistant, more hardened, they're going to have to spend a lot of money on building systems that are hack-proof, and they're going to have to hire more people that can monitor the systems for signs of Chinese penetration or Russian penetration. I mean, it's going to be a very painful process to try to shift away from over reliance on Chinese components and hence on easy penetration by the Chinese. We're making it easy. We have not even begun to erect serious defensive measures.
And to build on that real quickly, what Bill mentioned is we hosted a micro think tank last week on the Nexus of cybersecurity and healthcare. And one of the interesting things that our team has created is this kind of graphic novel, and we call it Defending Your Health. And the purpose of this communication is to distill complicated technology information on how people can protect their personal health information, the security of digital medical devices, and things like that. And I'm going to be covering, as a media and analyst, the HIMSS conference in a couple of weeks in Las Vegas. And one of the interesting things is I'm doing a lot of pre-interviews right now, and there are at least 50 vendors who are part of this large global healthcare conference that are physically going to be in attendance, in addition to, I don't even know how many will be attending virtually as well, whose mission it is to exactly do what you just said, Bill, which is to take cybersecurity and apply it in a holistic way to the healthcare ecosystem. And one of the things that I've listened and learned about that makes it particularly difficult, first of all, the criminals are just doing it for their own purposes. They lack empathy. They're holding the healthcare system, as you said earlier, for ransom, when literally it can mean life or death. So it seems that there are going to have to be consequences to get these goofballs to stop.
Right, and so it's it's like you're down 40-0 in the fourth quarter of a football game, and you say to the other team, "Hey, stop playing so well. It's not fair."
Yeah.
We have to up our game, and it's going to cost money. It's going to go into very sensitive areas of cooperation between the private sector and public sector. One of the reasons you mentioned the defense industrial base, 350,000 defense contractors supplying the Pentagon in multiple tiers. Tier 1, 2, 3, up to the Lockheeds and Martin Mariettas and so forth. So the Chinese are playing in the largely unprotected systems of the contractors at the low levels of this food chain, and then working their way up. They're trying to do that. It's documented. I've interviewed people who have gone through it. So, but the Pentagon does not have the right to surveil or to examine the IT systems of any of its suppliers, except for maybe the first tier, where they cooperate on identifying threats and attack vectors and such. But the entire defense industrial base is protected by law from having the Pentagon examine whether they've been penetrated by any foreign state actors. So this is just one example of how we're going to have to figure out how to manage the relationship between government and private sector. Another example is all these networks are not connected. The CIA has their network, Pentagon has its network, which is in terrible condition, and then private sector companies have their networks. There's no one mechanism that when the balloon goes up, when something happens, that all these networks communicate with each other about the threat. Again, that gets into very sensitive territory. Can government link to private sector networks? How would you build in the necessary firewalls and protections to respect the traditional distinctions between the public and private sector in the United States while allowing them to share critical information? So we're just in the very early stages of figuring these things out. The Biden administration has hired Chris Inglis as a cyber czar. That's one very positive step. But I still think they're in the very early stages of figuring out the enormity of this challenge.
There was just an interview with the former director Krebs that I saw just yesterday, and he described the cyber team at the White House now as a dream team.
Right.
I through my work have had the opportunity to connect with some of them, and you and I were trying to get an unnamed person who's very high up in one of the three-letter agencies to join us today. We would not mention his or her name, except he or she had left the three-letter organization and now is back. And for me, I'm having someone of his caliber and the people who are in government right now, it gives me a lot of hope.
I'm seeing signs that this has happened to me 2 or 3 times recently, that I develop a relationship with someone who's very smart on these issues, and suddenly they say, "Oh, I'm going back into the IC, the intelligence community." I get the sense that the intelligence community is bulking up on China talent and technology talent, and they're beginning to try to come to grips with what's going on.
Yeah. So, wow. I mean, we could just go on forever. This is so incredibly important and interesting. And so Bill, one of your final chapters is.
Well, you're muted there, Gary.
I lost you. We lost you.
Oh, and it was my most genius statement too. Oh well. But what I was saying is that in your book, towards the end, you say quite directly and succinctly what must be done. So, can you answer your own question?
Well, I've been outlining some of the steps that building greater durability and resistance into our IT systems. I think a lot of our purveyors of IT equipment have not been really leveling about the risks that that cloud computing represents. For example, the IBM, after it was revealed that the APT-10 group had been inside their systems for 4 years, and hopping on to other systems of other companies that trusted IBM to host their software and their data in this cloud, that IBM said, well, we were not aware of any activity like that. They couldn't see it. They could not see what the Chinese had done, and which the federal government had documented. So there needs to be a moment of reckoning in the IT community, in the IT security community, about who are we fooling here? Are we really selling products to companies that are protecting them? Or are we just making money on consulting and building things we know will break and have to be repaired, have to be fixed? So I mean, there's a moment of reckoning in the IT and IT security industry. There's a moment coming where the government is going to have to look at what do we do about our large technology companies, tech giants, and their activities in China. I mean, Qualcomm is designing semiconductor chips being manufactured by TSMC that are showing up in the Chinese military. I mean, if you're concerned about Chinese military buildup, do you really want to sell semiconductors to that military? So we need to have a series of rolling conversations across our public sector and private sector about how do we defend our American values, defend our American system, yet at the same time make it become more cohesive and more focused in resisting China, and how do we also build a true community of nations involved in this, sharing this vision? Not if we do it by ourselves, it's already probably too late. The Chinese already have achieved global position that far exceeds what anyone really understands. So these are things that have to be done. We have to educate people. We have to build alliances across boundaries that once were unbreachable. We need to be honest with each other. Wouldn't that be refreshing? Let's be honest with what's really happening. And I think that's, as a journalist and author, I think that's always the starting point. What we're doing today, I'm trying to be honest. Let's talk about what's really happening. And if we can build an awareness of what's really happening, then we might have a chance of building a response.
I mean, that was just incredibly insightful, important, and something that, in a small way, the mission of the Cyber Hero Network, to shine the light on these matters and opportunities. And so, how do people get a copy of your book, Bill?
Well, I just happen to have a copy here, right? It's on Amazon, and both Kindle version and a trade paperback version. So that's the way to get it. It's not done by a random house that printed 500,000 hard covers and sent them to bookstores around the country. That old model is breaking down. The new model of book publishing increasingly is that you have it on demand. You have paperback, trade paperback versions, and you, as an author, you have to go out and on shows like yours, have to articulate why people need to read it, need to understand what's in it. So this is guerrilla warfare on my part.
Okay, and they can connect with you on LinkedIn, or do you want to give a shout out to your website?
Well,
or email?
my email is William J. Well, my website is William J. Holstein, William J. Holstein, no punctuation.com, and my email is Holstein, Holstein, 2011 @gmail. So, and I am on LinkedIn, and I'm on Twitter. So, and I've hired an Indian digital marketing assistant in India to promote the book on places I've never even heard of. Instagram Reels. Instagram now has a service where you can post a 15-second video, and all the young people love it. So if that's what it takes to make a book happen, I'll go on Instagram too.
Right on. So Scott, you have some final words?
May I ask Scott a question? So when I say these things about the private sector and the public sector, you obviously are leading an American company. I mean, does it sound like crazy talk to you, or does it ring a bell to say, yes, we have to do something? How do you react to those things I was saying?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm wearing different hats as an American citizen, as a business owner running a small business, as a cybersecurity expert, as a designer, manufacturer of wireless telecommunication equipment. I think the alarms are sounding. The private and public sector have to communicate better, work together to stop these cyber threats, because without sharing knowledge, it's never going to get better. And I always preach, look at the dark web as an example where cyber criminals and hackers do really well. They share information freely. We need to do the same, public and private sector, and certainly on networks such as this network, I think it's important because it brings people and topics together where we freely share information. I look at, just from a business standpoint, look at the global shortage right now of integrated circuits. The problem, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, talking about a lot of stuff is manufactured in China, predominantly in Taiwan now, with TSMC as the primary wafer manufacturer, and Samsung. Only down the list do you see a company like AMD that partnered with Broadcom and Qualcomm and other companies, but they only really have 2 foundries here to make wafers in the United States. Otherwise, it's all done in Germany and Singapore and other countries. To me, fundamentally, looking at technology as a whole, a lot more needs to be done here in the United States to balance things out. The United States is so heavily dependent on technology that is used for surveillance, for communications, whether it be military, for commercial applications. Everything is dependent upon other countries now. That's a huge problem if 1 or 2 of these partners disappear. So I'm hoping that things balance out a little bit more, because otherwise we're going to become an island in this global race for technology. And certainly the same problem with cybersecurity there. Even between countries, there needs to be knowledge that is shared to thwart some of these attacks, and really to stop some of these zero-day threats that are popping up everywhere. Look at just ransomware attacks that are happening in the U.S. alone. Unbelievable level. I'm seeing more than 4,000 reported attacks each day of ransomware just in the United States. That's unbelievable. How can law enforcement possibly keep up and defend this nation?
In some senses, our defenses have already been swamped.
Yeah.
But to the credit of the Biden administration, they have this $250 billion package moving through Congress, which including $50 billion for semiconductors.
Yeah.
So it's going to be fascinating to see how it's managed. Can it be managed in a way that actually results in industries being established and built on U.S. soil, or will our cutting-edge laboratories continue to produce ideas that find their way into the hands of shadow laboratories in southern China or anywhere in China, and that are developed more rapidly by our leading adversary? So, I mean, and how we manage this is going to be critically important, and whether we're able to lure TSMC into building a wafer facility in Arizona would be a critical first step in reviving American consumer goods manufacturing. Consumer electronics. We don't make a single piece of consumer electronics in this country. Not a single radio, television, computer. It's all made elsewhere.
Yeah. And decisions that are made today take about 5 years at least till you actually see a factory come to fruition and actually have enough output to handle the demand. So things need to be decided now. So it is good that, and I do agree, the Biden administration is pushing forth things that will make change as long as it actually happens and comes to fruition. That'll be a great thing.
Well, indeed. On behalf of a grateful digital universe, thanks so much to Bill Holstein and Scott Schober for their incredible insights into the social, economic, political, business changes that are affecting the country, from China and around the world. And I leave this conversation having listened and learned from 2 of the smartest people I know. So once again, thank you so much for who you are and what you do and why you do it. Everyone, have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.